Welcome. It's wonderful to see so many faces at this wonderful event. We are about to start the 16th Annual Economic Forum, a co-sponsored event of the School of Management of the University of Michigan-Flint and the Rotary Club of Flint. My name is Anne Marie Van Dyne, and I'm the president of the Rotary this year, and I proudly stand here and ask you to join me with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And would you please stay standing? So Rotarians model ethics, professional excellence, and service. And with the declaration of the four-way test, we are reminded of our commitment to those values, of what Rotarians think, say, and do. So would you please join me? Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you. Our Rotary International, please be seated, thank you. Our Rotary International theme for this year is Create Hope in the World, and to inspire us today is the Honorable Duncan Beagle.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. You know, this is a special time of the year when we get a chance to reflect on a lot of different things. I'm sure many of you have had heartache in your life. You may have lost a loved one, may have had a health issue, gone through a divorce, and so forth. I just thought I'd take a moment and share a little bit with you. I often have people come up to me because I'm in a wheelchair and say, you always seem to have such a positive attitude. Well, that wasn't always true. I go back nearly 33 years ago when after being in a hospital for about 3 or 4 months and they weren't able to figure out what caused my not being able to walk, finally a doctor came in and said, it's highly unlikely that you'll ever walk again. So I was on a floor with people with spinal cord injuries, and I wasn't exactly in a good mood. Why me? What am I going to do with my practice? I'd been engaged 10 days, wondering if my fiance was going to stay with me. Didn't know what I was going to do with my law practice and so forth. Well, things changed one night when a guy that was younger than me and had custody of 2 daughters had an electric wheelchair, and he came in and he bumped into my bed and drove me about 10 feet. I didn't talk to him. He was in the bed next to me, and finally he said, you're not handling this very well, are you? I said, well, I don't know. He goes, I want you to know my situation. I'm paralyzed from the neck down. I cannot change the TV. I can't eat by myself, and I can't go to the restroom by myself, and I'm probably going to lose custody of both my daughters. We talked for about an hour that night, and he changed my attitude real quick. But beyond that, I began to wonder, what's going to happen with my law practice? What's going to happen with my fiance? My father, who was living in Florida at the age of about 77, came out of retirement and took over my law practice for about 4 weeks so it could survive. My fiance stayed with me, and every single day for about 2 months drove from Flint to Ann Arbor to make sure that I was okay. My college baseball coach came to visit me, and as coaches can do, he says, well, you got 2 choices. You can feel sorry for yourself and do nothing, or you can pick it up and move forward like I know you will. And he said, just remember, tough times never last, but tough people do. Well, I'll tell you what, my attitude, as I said, changed very, very quickly. And as a result of that, one of our circuit judges just happened to retire about the second week I was on the spinal cord floor. And I had a number of lawyers, had a number of judges that went and supported me. And then one day, I couldn't believe it, got a call from the governor of Michigan that said I was going to be appointed a circuit judge for Genesee County. And if that wasn't enough in May, it was 3 months later when my wife and I got married. So at the end of that calendar year, I ended up in a wheelchair, not able to walk, but I found a job that I absolutely loved for my 31 years on the bench. and I got a lovely wife with 33 years of marriage, so I am one lucky guy. Now, you might say, well, what's that got to do with what's going on? I've found, and I think this special time of year, all of us have been through some trials and tribulations in life, but let's make it a point to reach out to some of our old friends we haven't spoken to in several years. Let's talk to other people, our next door neighbor, and give them some words of wisdom and so forth. And I know I try and do that in my own little way. Smile on days that you don't want to smile. Be respectful and courteous to people. We know what's going on in the world right now ain't exactly the easiest, but I think reaching out to other people, saying something positive and so forth can make a difference. If any of you need to be boosted up someday and you ever want to talk about positive times and tough times, I'm more than happy to do so. I just thought I'd share that thought with you so that you'll realize some days when you think you're at your lowest, there's ways that you can move yourself up. So I wish all of you happy holidays and hope you'll reach out to other people and give them some words of wisdom. Thank you.
I'd like to share just a bit about what it means to be a Rotarian. The Rotary Club of Flint is part of a global network of 1.2 million members. We see the world, a world, where people unite and take action to create lasting change. Rotary members believe that we have a shared responsibility to take action on our world's most persistent issues, and our 35,000 clubs worldwide work together on several global priorities: to promote peace, to fight disease, to provide clean water, sanitation, and hygiene, save mothers and children, support education, and grow local economies. Our current and long-standing worldwide effort is the eradication of polio. Since 1979, we have helped immunize 3 billion children in 122 countries and have contributed $2.1 billion in the eradication effort. The polio virus is still present in 2 countries. Rotarians continue eradication efforts to rid the world of this crippling disease and help keep other countries polio-free. Our club has been active in this community for 107 years, and we have left a mark both in Flint and around the world. Recently, through our support of the Rotary Area 7 Literacy Project, community beautification projects, which include the maintenance of the beautiful Rotary Park in downtown Flint, sponsorship of the Skills Kitchen at Catholic Charities Center for Hope, providing clean drinking water for residents of Haiti through the Living Water Haiti Project, and through volunteer service with many local organizations. We're delighted to be part of this community tradition, presenting today's esteemed panel of economists. And now to start off today's program, please help me welcome to the stage School of Management Interim Dean Yenner Kanduan. Yenner.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our campus. Welcome to the annual Economic Forum. Every second Friday of December, we get together here to look back at the economy and discuss macroeconomic, financial, and global developments, and talk about what's ahead of us in the new year. This annual tradition began 16 years ago as an initiative of Dr. Jack Helmut, then Dean of our School of Management, my former boss, now friend, Professor of Finance and a Rotarian, in collaboration with the Rotary Club of Flint. Over time, this event became something that I look forward to each year. At this time, I would like to invite Dr. Helmut to the podium for the introduction of the panelists.
Thank you, Yenner. As President Anne-Marie and Yenner mentioned, this is our 16th annual event, and the way I look at that is we're going to keep on doing it until we get it right, or we got it right and we're going to keep on doing it. And I think it's the latter. And that requires a lot of cooperation. It's great to see the city out here, people from the city, the campus, high schools, other Rotarian clubs, Sunrises here. So as we mentioned, it is a great event. Again, my name is Jack Helmuth, welcoming fellow Rotarians and the community at large and the academic community to this event. Later in this afternoon, if you want to see the PowerPoints, again, the PowerPoints and a video will be on the School of Management website. Am I right, Jenner? Oh, okay. So over the years, we've had the panelists prove that economics is not a dull subject, the dismal science. And what I will do is ask each of the panelists, we have 3 panelists, to go ahead and provide some introductory remarks on some important concepts. At the end of their remarks, I will go ahead and we go into something called Q&A. You've got pencils and paper at your tables, I believe. You can go ahead and write those questions out. They'll come up here, and then the panelists will go ahead and give us some insights in that regard. I want to go ahead and one final shout out here in recognition of Grand Blanc High School. They're here today, so thank you very much, Grand Blanc High School and Professor Nichols for supporting and being here this afternoon. A hand of applause. Go Wildcats. Okay. Okay, now I will attempt to introduce the panel. Dr. Christopher Douglas, Professor of Economics and Department Chair, Social Sciences and Humanities, University of Michigan, Flint College of Arts and Sciences. Welcome, Chris. Again, perfect attendance, 16 times. Dr. Yenner Kendogan, Professor of International Business and Interim Dean of the School of Management, and also Faculty Associate, Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, our branch campus. Okay, and then finally, Steve Chinenko, MBA, has a variety of experiences in the banking industry, is the former Chief Investment Risk Officer for Nationwide Insurance. I will ask Chris to provide the first set of comments.
So thank you for the introduction. It's always great to be back at the Economic Forum. So today I'll just give some remarks in terms of how we did in 2023, and then maybe what things are looking like for 2024. So maybe the question on people's minds for 2023 is, to quote Taylor Swift, are we out of the woods yet? In terms of the economic turmoil we've seen during COVID and then post-COVID, meaning have we achieved that elusive soft landing? The data suggests, well, maybe we have. Unemployment rates below 4%. About 240,000 new jobs created each month on average in 2023, 150,000 new jobs created in October, 199,000 new jobs created in November. That number just came out today. Gross domestic product grew by a whopping 5% in the third quarter, double exclamation point, because that is a massive economic growth rate. We don't know what's going on for the fourth quarter until the data comes out next year, but the Atlanta Federal Reserve Bank does a forecast for what's happening with gross domestic product in real time. So their most recent forecast, when I put these slides together, said that gross domestic product was growing by 2.1%. Still a good economic growth rate, although when I checked this morning, that had been revised downwards to 1.2%. That's not so great. It's still positive, at least. The Cleveland Federal Reserve Bank says that inflation is just under 3% right now, so we're slowly moving back to the Federal Reserve's 2% target. So again, the data suggests that, well, we are kind of on our way to a soft landing. Although we got to be clear in terms of inflation, because disinflation is not the same as deflation. Deflation means prices are falling. Prices are never going to fall back to where they were before the pandemic. That's just not going to happen. It would take a massive recession for that to happen. So when we talk about inflation falling to 2%, what that means is prices are still rising. They'll still be 2% higher at the end of the year than before the year. Your grocery bill will still be higher. Prices are just not rising as fast as they were before. So looking forward to 2024, if you remember my remarks from last year, I was worried that there might be a recession and a financial crisis due to high interest rates. The Silicon Valley Bank failed earlier this year, then the First Republic Bank failed right after that. So I'm like, oh man, that prediction's coming true, here we go. And then for whatever reason, no more banks failed, and the economy continued to chug along. So it does look like we're on our way to a soft landing, but I'm not willing to declare ourselves out of the woods just yet. Simply because recessions happen very quickly. It's like the light switch goes off in the economy, and the economy goes from good to bad without any warning and without any room in between. Recessions happen quickly without much advance notice. So for instance, go back 15 years ago before the Great Recession, in December 2007, the economy created 106,000 new jobs, good number for an economy that's largely at full employment. January 2008, that light switch goes off and job creation is negative every month for the next 2 years. And in more months than not, during that time period, job creation was negative in six-figure territory. More than 100,000 jobs were lost every month. So if you're thinking about the question, are we close to a recession or not, because that's another question on people's mind, keep an eye on these two things, the price of oil and interest rates, because for the last 50 years, those are the two causes of recessions, except for the 2020 recession, which was just a bit of a fluke due to the economic shutdown. So, like I said, keep an eye on interest rates, oil prices, and some other things I'll talk about here in a second, because their impact could be significant on the economy, or maybe their impact is not significant on the economy. That's why recessions are hard to forecast. So thinking about real quickly, post-World War II recessions of the last 50 years, 73 to 75, that recession is due to the price of oil basically tripling due to the OPEC oil embargo. 1980, the price of oil triples again. It hadn't fallen yet, it tripled again. So by 1980, oil is about 10 times more expensive than it was in 1973. 1980, that's a recession due to the Iranian Revolution. 1990 to 1991, the price of oil doubles due to the Persian Gulf War. Causes a mild recession because the war is over quickly and oil prices come back down quickly. But it was a bad enough recession to cost the first President Bush his re-election. 2001 recession, people blamed that on 9/11 and on Enron. The problem is the timing doesn't work out for that explanation because those events happened in the fall. The recession actually began in March. I would say the 2001 recession is due to oil doubling between 2000 and 2001, which people forget it did, as well as interest rates rising. Sure, the NASDAQ crashed. That did not help things, but I would attribute at least partial responsibility to the stock market crash to interest rates increasing. Think about the Great Recession. Hard to believe that's been 15 years ago. That's the first time I spoke here at the Economic Forum in 2008. People blame that on the housing and stock market crashes. Sure, that didn't help. But people might forget that the Federal Reserve aggressively increased interest rates through 2006. Plus, oil hits $150 a barrel summer of 2007. And I would blame, at least partially, the stock market and housing market crashes on those higher interest rates. So again, except for the COVID recession, which was very short-lived due to the shutdown, recessions of the last 50 years, oil and interest rates. So real quickly, this is a graph of the money supply. I think I show this every year. The Federal Reserve doubles the money supply during COVID. It's a bit hard to believe that half of all dollars ever been created in the US history have been created in the last 3 years. So what the Federal Reserve did is it just flooded the economy with this newly printed money while the production of goods and services was curtailed during the pandemic. And that is just a textbook recipe for inflation. I think it's a real black eye to the economics profession that so many economists got caught by surprise that inflation followed. I was not caught by surprise, by the way, but lots of people were. The federal funds rate, this is the interest rate the Federal Reserve targets through monetary policy. All other interest rates follow suit. So every gray bar on this graph is a recession. You can see that before every recession, the Federal Reserve has increased interest rates. Even the recessions we blame on oil, like 73, 1980, 1990, the Federal Reserve was raising interest rates before the price of oil spiked. And in fact, if you listen to interviews with the first President Bush, he blames Alan Greenspan for his loss in the 1992 presidential election. Because he said Greenspan tightened interest rates too aggressively and then was too slow to lower them when the economy entered into a recession. Although you could find time periods like the mid-1990s and the mid-1980s where rates went up and no recession followed. That's why recessions are hard to predict. Another thing to keep your eye on, government interest payments on the national debt. It becomes expensive to have a national debt when rates rise and debt rolls over to a higher interest rate. Right now, the federal government's spending more than about $1 trillion on interest payments on the national debt, which is more than the entire defense budget. And that's only going to get higher as rates remain elevated. The Federal Reserve right now is losing $120 billion as a consequence of them selling bonds that they loaded up their balance sheet with, paying a low interest rate that they're now selling as rates are rising. If you know your bond market, that's a good way to take a big loss on the bond market. Just real quickly, the federal government's running a $1.2 trillion budget deficit, which is beyond irresponsible when the unemployment rate's below 4%. Price of oil, you can see before every recession, the price of oil has spiked. Keep your eye on that, although there's no guarantee that a spike in the price of oil causes a recession, because you could see time periods like in 2022 where the price of oil spiked and no recession followed. So again, recessions are hard to predict, just keep your eye on that. The price of homes, it's a bit surprising to me that home prices remain elevated in the face of high interest rates. Usually, when interest rates go up, home prices come back down as compensation. That has not happened yet. So you have people right now buying expensive houses at high interest rates. What explains that? Well, the supply of housing remains curtailed. This is a graph of new housing starts. House construction has not yet rebounded to where it was before the Great Recession 15 years ago. Right now, the same number of houses are being built as they were in the mid-1990s. So that's a big constraint on the supply of houses, plus the fact that about 80% of homeowners have a mortgage interest rate of 5%. They're very reluctant, understandably, to put their house on the market when buying something new means paying an 8% interest rate. So the supply of houses is restricted for that reason as well. So supply is restricted, that's keeping house prices up in the face of high interest rates. It remains to be seen how long that could persist for. So to just conclude, we have something like a Energizer Bunny economy, to quote the Treasury Secretary, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. It just really remains an open question how long that could continue for. Because we really have a high interest rate economy right now that was built for low interest rates. How many people are buying a house right now thinking, well, I could just refinance at a year or two when rates drop? What if rates don't drop? How long can the federal government spend $1 trillion on interest payments on the national debt before something breaks? $1 trillion, that's half of all personal income taxes collected, just going to pay interest on the national debt. So if you think about the Great Recession 15 years ago, that caught people by surprise. Recessions do. So I just hope that we're not caught by surprise again. So in terms of risk factors, keep an eye on interest rates, keep an eye on oil prices, keep an eye on geopolitical events, and I just worry, hopefully incorrectly, that something's eventually going to break. But hopefully it will not. We'll hope for the best, and we'll hope for that proverbial soft landing into 2024. Although we're kind of in uncharted territory. As far as I know, we've never achieved a soft landing following something like COVID yet. But of course, there's always a first time for everything. So that's what I've got. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I will turn the mic over to Jenner. Thanks.
Yeah, that was wonderful, Chris. Who's Taylor Swift? Our next speaker is Dr. Ken Dogan.
Growth globally is projected to remain weak in 2023 and 24. The forecast is for global growth to slow from 3.5% in 2022 to 3% in 23, and further down to 2.7% in 2024. These are all well below the historical average of 3.8% in the first 20 years of 2000s. Largest advanced economies are expected to slow from 2.6% in 2022 to 1.5% in 23, and then to 1.2% in 24, as the monetary policy tightening starts to bite. The United Kingdom and Germany are projected to be the worst performers among advanced economies. Largest emerging markets and developing economies are projected to have a declining growth from 4.5% in 2023 to 3.9% in 24. India, China, Indonesia, and Turkey are expected to be best performers among large emerging markets in 2023. although all are again projected to perform worse in 24, except Indonesia. In this group, Argentina is expected to perform the worst. Additionally, note that China's expected growth rates in 2023 and 24 are not near 10% growth rates that this country is used to in early 2000s. Just 3 days ago, Moody's downgraded China's government debt to negative just because of this. Inflation around the world reached multi-decade heights in 2022. It has come down a bit in many large economies, driven by the decline in food and energy prices in the first half of 2023. However, the core inflation, which excludes these two most volatile components of inflation, hasn't significantly slowed. It remains well above central banks' targets. Global inflation is forecast to decline steadily from 8.7% in 2022 to 6.9% in 23, and then to 5.8% in 24 due to tighter monetary policy and lower international commodity prices. Core inflation is generally projected to decline more gradually, and it's not expected to return its targets until 2025 in most cases. The danger here is that the high inflation experience of the last 2 years could result in persistent high inflationary expectations, complicating central banks' paths to getting the inflation down, which would mean that the interest rates may need to tighten further or remain higher for longer. Indeed, monetary policy actions are key to keep the inflation expectations anchored. The tightening of monetary policy has been working its way through the economies. Alongside the rapid increase in policy rates, the interest rates for new corporate loans and new mortgage loans have also increased. The graph shows that the monetary policy tightening cycle is close to its peak in many large economies and projected to be lower in coming months. There are significant and growing divergences in global recovery across regions. A disproportionate share of the global growth in 2023 and 24 are expected to come from Asia, despite the weaker than expected recovery in China. Divergent growth prospects across the world's regions pose a challenge to returning to pre-pandemic output trends. Despite signs of resilience earlier in 2023, the impact of monetary policy tightening to reduce the inflation is expected to cool the economy going forward. While risks to the outlook are more balanced than earlier in the year, they remain tilted to downside, implying little margin for errors. Growth in the East Asia and the Pacific region is projected to strengthen to 5.2% in 2023 from 4.5% in 22. Countries here are sorted from the highest to lowest 2023 growth rates. Projected growth in China this year has been revised following a faster than expected reopening of their economy after the pandemic. Growth in this region, excluding China, is set to slow to 5% in 2023 from 5.8% in 22 as the boost from earlier reopening fades in several large economies. Regional trade growth remains subdued among weak global demand, and downside risks for the region include tighter than expected global financial conditions, stubborn inflation, weakness in China's property sector, and geopolitical tensions. Economic prospects in Europe continue to be held back by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Growth in this region is projected to remain weak in 2023, edging up to a modest 1.4% as the effects of the invasion, high inflation, tight monetary policies, and subdued external demand weigh on the economic activity in Europe. On this slide, I have the growth projections for emerging European economies, which are expected to perform better in this region. When we look at the Eurozone economies, though, those with the highest 2023 projected growth rates are notably very small economies. Larger Eurozone economies, on the other hand, have very low or negative projections for 2023, as in the case of Germany. As the inflation gradually recedes and demand firms up, the regional growth is forecast to pick up to 2.7% in 2024. Risks to this region's economy include a more sustained inflation, a sharper slowdown than expected in region's trade partners, further financial sector turmoil, and most importantly, intensification of the Ukraine war, which is a very likely situation given the challenges in the financing of war coming from the US and the European Union. Moving to Latin America, growth in this region, the Latin America and the Caribbean, is expected to slow sharply from 4.1% in 2022 to 2.3% in 23. With core inflation above central bank targets across the region, monetary policy is likely to remain tight, dampening the growth. Policy uncertainty in some countries is damaging business and consumer confidence. Argentina continues to be one of the worst performers in Latin America. Risks to the region include slower growth in major trade partners, tighter monetary policies, renewed financial stress in advanced economies, which will have adverse spillovers in the region through weak trade and restrictive financial conditions. Indeed, one overall risk for all emerging markets, not only those in Latin America, is the rapid rise of interest rates in the United States. This poses a significant challenge to emerging markets and developing economies. The Federal Reserve has pivoted toward a more hawkish stance to rein in inflation, and this is associated with especially adverse financial market effects in developing countries, including a higher likelihood of experiencing a financial crisis. The effect of this appears to be more pronounced in emerging markets with greater economic vulnerabilities. This highlights that emerging markets need to adjust macroeconomic and financial policies to mitigate the negative impact of rising global and US interest rates. The question is, will they be able to do it? If not, there may be a global financial crisis ahead of us in 2024, starting from a large emerging country with such existing vulnerabilities and spread to the rest of the world like a contagion. I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. That was very informative. And our final speaker, Steve Chernenko.
Thank you. Good to be back. Last year I talked about cryptocurrency, and this year I'm going to talk about a specific application of cryptocurrency, central bank digital currency, CBDC. We'll talk about what it is, pros and cons, what need, if any, does it fill or problem does it solve. Now, every time I think about CBDC, I think about two things that have nothing to do with digital currency. I think about CBGB, the punk rock club in New York that opened 50 years ago this week, I just heard on NPR. And I think about CBD oil, and sometimes I think the people that are pushing CBDC have been using a lot of other CBD products. So what is it? It's a digital liability of the Federal Reserve that's widely available to the general public. So two key points there. A digital liability of the Federal Reserve, and we'll talk about what that means a little bit and what is and is not a liability of the Fed, and widely available to the general public. So today, the only liability of the Fed that's available to the general public, individuals, corporations, not-for-profits, et cetera, is physical cash. Those things you have in your wallet or your pocket or your pocketbook that you may not use anymore, that's a Federal Reserve note on top of them. Those are the only liabilities of the Federal Reserve that we use. When we think about money, our other money, our money in our checking account that we use to pay our bills, that's a liability of a bank. That's not a liability of the Federal Reserve or any other part of the government. So if it's not physical, it's digital. And if it's not physical, it's a liability of a bank, not of the Fed. Okay, so most of our currency today is digital, checking accounts, credit cards, PayPal, and those are not government or Federal Reserve liabilities. Banks hold digital currency at the Fed. Those are liabilities of the Federal Reserve, those bank reserves. Banks can easily go back and forth. You put $1 in the bank, they put $1 in the Fed. Well, their dollar is backed by the Fed, your dollar is not. You want to take your dollar out, they go to the Fed, they take their dollar out of the Fed, and they give it to you. They seamlessly go back and forth. So how does this work? Why do we all carry around this money? I don't even think we think about that some of our money is a Fed liability and some of it is not a Fed liability. I don't think about that. It's all the same to me. But the system works because A, because it's worked for a long time, B, because we have confidence in the U.S. economy, confidence in the banking system. Banks are FDIC insured, highly regulated. Chris mentioned a couple of failures. There was not a contagion throughout the whole system. So it works, but it's really a distinction without a difference. When my sister owes me money because I bought our mother a gift and she owes me half, she can give me that money in a few ways. If she sees me, she can hand me cash. But she doesn't really want to see me. So she could write me a check and mail me a check. That's great. I take a picture with my phone, I put it in my bank account. God forbid I could even go to the bank. Or my sister is younger, so maybe she wants to Venmo me, or Zelle me, or PayPal me, or something else. I have to set up an account that I don't know how to do. So to be widely available to the general public, there is a lot of research going on, and there was an executive order from the president that all the government agencies should study a central bank digital currency. Now, the Fed does not offer accounts to the public today. So if there was a central bank digital currency, how would we use it? Where would we hold it? If we would hold it at the Fed, as banks do, that's a massive expansion of the Federal Reserve's authority and activity. That would likely take congressional action. Therefore, it's not likely. Or there could be intermediaries where we would hold our central bank digital currency, sort of like an electronic safe deposit box. What problem that solves, why we need that, not sure. So the Fed has goals of monetary stability, financial stability, and a safe and effective payment system. So do we need a central bank digital currency, something that would be a liability of the Fed that we all had access to, something we don't have today? Does it support these goals of the Fed? Monetary stability, financial stability, safe and effective payment system. Well, most of our currency is already digital. Payment options abound. We make digital transactions all the time. There's no reason to think the Federal Reserve would be better at this than what we already have. There's competition in that system today. I mentioned PayPal, Venmo, Zelle. I write checks. I pay my credit card bill online. They take it right out of my checking account. There's plenty of options today. There's really no reason to think the Fed or any other government agency would be better at this. Being a liability of the central bank, it doesn't require deposit insurance, regulation, etc. It eliminates the middleman, the banks. But again, where are we going to hold this currency? How are we going to hold it? There's going to need to be some means, and barring of holding accounts directly at the Federal Reserve, I really don't think the Federal Reserve wants to bank 300 million individual Americans plus small businesses and corporations and all those other things. There's still going to need to be some kind of a system that's not part of the Fed where we would hold this money. That's going to introduce a whole bunch of new problems and risks that people don't really think about. And individuals today don't distinguish between these two different types of currency. The Federal Reserve liability and all the other money that's really the money I use, right? I mean, I don't want cash. I don't want to have to store cash in my mattress or keep it in a safe deposit box. That has an opportunity cost. I can't earn interest on it. It has a storage cost. I got to pay for the security wherever it is, or if I keep it in my mattress, I have the big risk that it disappears. My sister comes to my house and takes it. So does it solve a real-time instant payment system? Well, the private sector has already developed these. The Fed has developed one called FedNow. They're testing that and rolling it out, and they're sort of holding back the private sector developments, hoping that their system gains some traction and maybe becomes the leader. But the key requirement here is a digital currency, not a central bank digital currency. So it's a payment system issue. It's not a currency issue. We had the question last year about whether the dollar would stay and continue as the world's reserve currency. And I think the panel ranged anywhere from yes, really don't see that changing, to it would take some kind of real inflection point, some real catastrophic event like a big war or something to knock the dollar off reserve currency. Well, the dollar is a reserve currency because of the strength of the economy, faith in the U.S. economy, faith in our markets, our property right protections, our legal system that supports commerce. And I can't think that if individuals didn't think those things were still working, the fact that we had a Federal Reserve-backed digital currency would make the difference and keep the dollar the reserve currency. That doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense to me. And then there's also a lot of talk about this can help reach people that are non-banked. Well, in 2019, these are Federal Reserve statistics, 5.4% of U.S. households were not banked. 75% of those people did not want a bank account. It was not an inability to get a bank account. They didn't want one. So if you don't trust banks, I don't think you're going to trust the Federal Reserve. I don't think that's the same demographic of people. So I don't think that's really going to solve that problem either. If it's even a problem, if those people don't want bank accounts, it's not really a problem. And now if all this digital currency sits outside the normal banking system, let's say it's cash in a safe deposit box equivalent, it could affect the currency that's available for lending, for managing interest rates, for managing monetary policy, for managing the money supply. The Fed has not really answered how it would deal with those things if it does go and pursue the digital currency. It also would give the federal government visibility into every transaction. So that's a significant risk that I think a lot of people worry about. And this last risk, which the Fed has identified, is that all the information will be centralized in one place, so a cybersecurity breach would be catastrophic. I think we kind of have that risk today anyhow. I'm not sure that's that much more of a risk, but certainly a risk that the Fed has identified. So is it coming or not? Again, the President has asked all the agencies to study this. There are, a not insignificant number of Federal Reserve governors that have talked about this, and a number of them have talked about it as it's a solution in search of a problem, not something we really need, doesn't really solve any problem. So at this point, it doesn't appear terribly likely, but these things can change quickly as well. Thank you.
We're going to start the Q&A. I already have some questions that have been provided. And panel, great presentation. So our first question, this will go to you, Chris. How much of the GDP growth this fall is due to the $1.2 trillion deficit in government spending?
Yeah, I don't know that off the top of my head. It is true, though, if the government is spending $1.2 trillion more than what it's bringing in in tax revenue, that's going to increase GDP growth, at least on paper. Then the worry I have is that at some point the budget has to be balanced. It just seems like a law of nature. So at what point in the future do things reverse and a $1.2 trillion deficit become a $1.2 trillion surplus? I don't see that happening anytime soon, so I just worry that that reversal is going to be fairly ugly. But in terms of the counterfactual, what would GDP look like if the federal government wasn't spending so much money? I don't know, other than it would be certainly a lot lower.
Thank you. This question will go to Yenner, okay, and it also mentions reserve currency, okay, at which point I think we talked about this last year. We can jump in on that also. But the question is, how would you rate the threat of BRICS? Now, BRICS is an acronym for several countries: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America. So it's the acronym is BRICS. How would you rate the threat from these countries in terms of trying to upstage the dollar as the reserve currency?
So I'll ask that by asking some questions. How many of you will save your earnings in Brazilian real or Russian ruble and Indian rupees or Chinese yuan or Saudi rial? you need to have confidence to be able to have a currency as a reserve currency. And I don't think that any of these countries have the confidence it requires.
So, and again, for the rest of the panel here, there's a lot of news about upstaging the U.S. currency as the reserve currency, but is there a lot of noise trying to create economic uncertainty and fear, or is it fear-mongering, or it gets a lot of press?
Yeah, it's really not anything I would lose sleep over. I don't think it's anything happening soon. I think it would take some kind of cataclysmic event like a major war. And, I sort of think about Britain was a world power until World War I, World War II, and then they couldn't be anymore. And I think it's that type of event that would drive the dollar from being the reserve currency of the world.
And in 1900, it was the British sterling, and of course, Britain ruled the world, and that was the last change in currency status like that. Okay, now here's a question that is going to upstage the 17th conference a year from now. How will the U.S. presidential elections impact the economy? I'll toss this one up for the panel. Presidential elections, that's next year, and how will that affect the economy?
It depends on who gets elected.
I think it'll affect the economy a great deal.
Yeah, one thing the economy does not like is uncertainty. So I think 2024 is shaping up to be a pretty chaotic election year. I mean, former President Trump still remains, the odds-on favorite to win the Iowa caucus, be the nominee. I mean, he's doubling the nearest competitor. So if he gets kicked off the ballot for whatever reason, that will throw a big wrench into things. And you could see a pretty uncertain presidential election. The current president's health is always a question mark too, and just toss a bunch of uncertainty in the current economy, it could be a little bit dicey. But if we have a nice, smooth election and the ship doesn't get rocked too much, well, that probably won't have much of an economic impact.
Okay, thank you. Question for Jenner. Why is India's economy growing so fast?
Well, India is a developing country, so by nature they don't have as much capital, which means the capital is scarce, the return to capital is high. So if there is any investment, so there's gonna yield to high returns. And part of the growth is because of their population growth that also increase growth rates. And they don't necessarily have to develop their own technologies. When you become a developer, to be able to further grow in experience, increase in productivity, you need to develop technology. So as a developing country, you don't have to. So you acquire that from other countries. So it naturally, as a country grows, their growth rate slows down.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Now this is a long question. We might have to take a break. But, okay, I mean, it's a good question. The estimated cost of curbing, and this will be a toss-up for all the panel here, the estimated cost of curbing climate change and the level of need for loss and damage funding being addressed right now in COP28 can seem overwhelming. However, the ultimate cost of not curbing climate change could be even higher. How might economists bring their expertise to bear in helping people understand the relative cost of continuing on a path of dramatic climate change? Want me to repeat that?
So there is work being done about trying to assess all of those costs that were just mentioned. There's work being done about what the impacts to GDP will be. There's work being done about what the cost of achieving climate goals will be. And some of that work is including the externalities of pollution and such that today kind of get borne by all of us through our health and things, and nobody really writes a check for and pays for. But that work is occurring. I imagine it'll mature and may or may not achieve a consensus, but economists are pursuing those questions.
And are we finding that some banks and other financial intermediaries, are they involved in trying to embed some of the costs, okay, and the uncertainty and the risk to shareholders, okay, with the possibility of having these.
They are, and if you read their SEC filings, you would see that. I think the question is, are they doing it to be responsive politically or socially, or are they doing it because they truly think it is a real economic risk to their investors?
Okay. Thank you.